Oak Life Familia. What is good? It is Greg, it is Rachel, and we're back at it again with the Roots and Branches, continuing the conversation from Sunday's topic around belonging via spaces like church camp.
Yeah.
Now, I don't have much experience. Actually, I have been to church camp as a leader once, and it was a little weird, but it was a little beautiful at the same time. But I don't have much experience. Have you ever been to a church camp? Do you ever
Lot,
have that experience?
lots, so many. But it's funny because I've never been to church camp with Oak Life. That's funny.
Oh.
Always, every church I've been a part of, there's been church camps.
Well, thinking through church camp spirit experiences, since you have a smorgasbord, a
Yeah.
plethora of memories to pull from, what's the first memory that comes to mind? Good, bad, or ugly?
Oh, youth group. It's so fun, there's just so much with a church camp where um you've got you're away from your parents, for a couple days. You're with all your friends if you've been involved in the group. And youth groups are fun. I mean, they plan a lot of games, those are just, and some of them are gross. Like, I remember there's a lot of relays, the ones that I went to, right?
Mm,
A lot of chew up gum, and then everyone builds a sculpture and see how high you can make it, right? Like, it's gross stuff like that, but you kids love it. It's just so fun. Or just like things around food. How many marshmallows can you stuff in your
yeah,
mouth, and still say stuffy bunny or whatever it was?
yeah, that's so
And
funny.
yeah, and nasty things too. Blindfold you, try the food, what is it, right? Like, all the things. And then I think Kara brought up the worship. Our well I grew up charismatic, so the worship was always, we had some we got some access to some really, like, kind of, what do you want to say, pretty well known worship leaders within the
Mhm.
evangelical space. I remember Rita Springer came one time, and that was really good. I like her music. I appreciate her songs and stuff. But yeah, so the music was always, and there was like always hours in the evening, and then of course you go to sleep late, and there's all the food, and then the s'mores. Oh, playing hide and go seek in the dark and trying to
Mm,
find camp counselors, right? So the camp counselors would scatter, and then all the, like, hide in the trees or whatever, and then we'd go after them. And then there's always the, like, dedicating and rededicating your lives, like, over and
yeah,
over every single year
yeah,
to God,
yeah.
because you always fall short, right, the previous year. And then there's always a sermon about how we have to repent and, like, we fall short. And then the altar call that we talked about last week. And then and then there's, like, I grew up, there was always a sharing session at the end where everyone, 'cause, I mean, it's like, you're a kid, you're on hormones, you've been together, right? You've created this bond over the last 3-4 days, and then you just spill everything. It's all your, like, sins and emotional needs and all your feelings and insecurities. And then it just all comes out. And that's also several hours at the end. And then everyone feels so bonded and, like, close to each other. And, like, also in a sense, like you've confessed, so there's something there where maybe you feel less guilty of everything you've been carrying for a whole year until you could feel comfortable telling folks, so it's almost like a
Mm,
confession too, because in the evangelical tradition you don't confess
right,
to a priest, you just
right.
you just bear the weight of your I
Just
don't
put
know,
on the
because you're
fake
constantly
smile,
being
right?
told because you're constantly being told how guilty you are and how sinful you are, so it's just
Wow, wow.
yeah. So, and especially as teenagers, because the sins are
Yeah.
always around sex too. So it's just
Oh,
like, oh
yeah,
no,
of
you
course.
you had that thought. Oh no, like, so yeah.
Yeah, I was introduced to the term purpling my first time as I was a youth leader for a friend's church. And then there was like, yeah, you can't let the boys hang out with the girls too much because if they like hold hands, uh, boys would be blue and girls would be red, and together if they touch, they make purple. So that's
Never.
purpling. I was like, "Dude, you got weird. it was
I've never heard that.
it
That's
was some interesting things. So I had that experience. I had the experience for my first church that I went to. I was like early 20s, and we did this overnight boot camp. It was a 23-hour boot camp for the youth leaders where we got 3 hours of sleep in a 23-hour window. So we were up and they were trying to be like tough, like militant. And it's funny because like I know these guys and I could probably take all of them, but I'm like I got to be disciplined here and like treat them with respect. It was a very awkward experience, but at the end of it, there was this sense of camaraderie, this sense of bond that you're alluding to as kind of the biggest takeaway. And it makes me think of the importance around protected time, like intentional time. Like, hey, we're coming here. We're going to spend a bunch of quality time together. We're going to do things to create this bond, whether it's a real bond or it's a fabricated bond. It depends on, I guess, the heart that goes into it. But there is a sense of union. When I was a youth, did the youth leader thing, these kids, man, they were so tight at the end of it, tight with me, tight with each other, and it fizzled out over the following weeks. But yeah, the sense of bonding, there's something very beautiful about that. Hmm.
yeah, and it makes me think, right? Because we don't do it as Oak Life, but I now, as we're talking, I also think about our LGBTQ small group, right? Like,
Mhm.
and we have had biannual retreats for the last 2 years, and that's all organized by people within the group. They're not so churchy, I would say, though, but we have done worship, like we have done worship and devos every retreat, and I think, yeah, at least one of the days. So it's usually like a 1 or 2 night, and then people can come for like just the day or stay 1 or 2 nights. We've done um camping. I think was the very first one 2 summers ago. um the one that I joined, I don't know if they've done more. And then we did a winter retreat where we rented out a cabin. Oak Life contributed to that, by the way, for the retreats. And then last year we did Russian River, and then we did another retreat at the farm. What is it? The Intentional Community Farm that you also went to, Greg, for your
Heirloom
heirloom.
in Castro Valley, super
That was
nice.
cool. Yeah. So we've done those. And they are like, there is something special about just kind of getting away with a group of people that you do
Hmm.
fellowship with.
Hmm.
Um, or the amount of, yeah, and the amount of time you spend with each other, right? Like, I think in, what was it? So 2021 through 2022. So I moved, no, 2020, sorry, 2022 through 2023, because that's 2022 was when I arrived in Oakland. Um, we were, and this kind of reminded me of the, previous church culture that I grew up in, where you're seeing the same people multiple times a week. I mean, and like for weeks and weeks on, or months on straight. You see them for small group, then you see them for worship practice, maybe, like, and then you see them for some church event, and then you see them Sundays. I mean, it could be 3, 4, 5 times, and those aren't short times too; they're hours. So church camp is almost like, you're right. It's like a boot camp. It's a more intense. It's an intensive of even that.
Hmm.
But that's how the evangelical church I grew up in, like, roped you in, right? And how it was my community. And
Hmm.
for many people, if you think about how many hours people spend, right, volunteering, all the
Right.
different things, how many events and programs that churches have to run, but this literally becomes people's lives, you know? Yeah. And then the church camp is like, I don't know, takes the place of vacation or something.
Yeah. I feel like they're trying to like the intention of a camp. You get you get this maximum amount of time with people where you do everything together. Kara referenced Acts 8, I believe, and the book of Acts. We see the emerging church where they did everything together. And I think that there's something about doing life together in the purest sense that creates this sense of belonging that I think is beautiful. And many churches reference Acts and they're like, "Yeah, we're going to be the early church. We're going to do everything together because it's
Yeah.
fun." There is a that sense of community is super, super, super attractive,
Mm.
especially for people that don't feel like they have a sense of community. I think, to play thoughtful advocate here, not to start any arguments, but sometimes the belonging can be like, to what? Is it that we belong to each other, or is it that we belong to something bigger than us? And I think that's a curiosity around what could belonging look like at Oak Life? If we're going to continue the thread of last week, right, with altar calls, what can altar calls look like at Oak Life? What can belonging look like at Oak Life in the sense of what we see in Acts with the story of the Ethiopian, or the story of Cornelius, which is just 2 chapters later in Acts. It's this transition of these people who were deemed outside, um, but now belonging. But it's not that they were bonded to a person per se. They were bonded to this concept of Messiah, this concept of Christ. So it's just, I don't know. Any thoughts there between this, like, oh, community, we belong to each other, or no, belong to this thing that's bigger than just people?
Yeah, I think that's an interesting concept. And I'm just kind of looking at my notes I took from
Yeah, 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 yeah.
talk on Sunday, and how she's writing like belonging. Well, one of the notes I took is belonging is not one-sided, it's mutual.
Mm,
And I just thinking, but then I'm also thinking about your question about belonging to each other versus something outside of each other. And I don't
hmm
think those are mutually exclusive, because um, I wonder if this either or thinking, um, so yeah, sometimes we think it has to be either or, but I like what we're seeing, for instance, in um, whether we think of people as separate, like I think that concept from each other, and also as separate from um, other, like from God, versus what happens when people do get together, and the chemistry, almost as if in community the whole is greater than the sum of its parts.
hmm
So is it that God is separate from that, or like God is um almost is like is there, God is present, God like
hmm
in community, right? Like,
hmm
and how we think of God as a separate entity. So I guess like that's also some of the tricky things when you think like theologically about what is the word panentheism versus pantheism, right? So
mm
pantheism thinks about a plurality of gods.
hmm
Panentheism thinks about God in many different forms,
hmm
and um, I think I used to think about God as Father in the sky, Heavenly Father, very
hmm
separate from humanity.
hmm
Now, I mean, to say this, I would have thought like it was very blasphemous, like previously. But what if God is the love between people? Then,
hmm
or you think about how difficult it is to explain the concept of Trinity, for instance. But like,
hmm
it's easy for us to imagine God in our own image, because it's easy to imagine things in our own image, and that's
Yes.
why we want to personify everything, including animals, and when we write, because that's it feels very relatable to us. Um, but God is so much bigger than that, and um, when you think about that Trinitarian flow and us being a part of it, like you really get a sense that um it's not so separate as what we think.
hmm
Yeah, so
hmm
you're going back to your question, do we
hmm
belong to each other, or do we belong to something apart from us? I would say yes and yes.
Yes.
That's what I think, is that yes, we belong to each other, but when we belong to each other, we belong to something that's greater than just this one person or each other. Like, I think that's the beauty when you, like, you know, there's something really wonderful when we come together as a community. It's not just like, okay, there's 1 + 1 person and that's 2 people. I really think something like almost new comes out of that.
Hmm.
And that is, again, greater than the sum of its parts, and
Hmm.
can and does do amazing things in the world. That's um yeah. So, and has
No,
like an impact, that's bigger than just the individual people.
absolutely. Beautifully said. And you didn't take the bait. You didn't take the bait. You did the thing. I'm definitely for the both and. And wasn't trying to be divisive in that regard. That it's either or. And you beautifully brought up the Trinity. It's like we want to separate things. We want to, for our brain's sake, make things categorized and individualistic. Because it's just easier. It's easier to navigate that. It's easier to say, um, I'll have conversations with individuals, and it's like, yeah, I can pray to Jesus because Jesus was a person, but God is a little trickier, or the Spirit, like it's kind of weird. And you have other people that are like, oh, give me the Spirit. The Jesus thing is weird. So there are parts that are easier to, I guess, understand or to be attracted toward, whatnot. And I think that the both and regarding the group of people and God outside of that is absolutely what it's supposed to be. The reason why I bring that question up is because sometimes I wonder if, well, I'll use the example of anime, something that's a little less theologically fueled. If I see a person with like a Dragon Ball Z shirt on, I'm like, oh, we're cut from the same cloth. I can talk to them about the things, and it's like there's already like a kinship because of this thing that's bigger than us, right? So it's fun when you can spark up a conversation, or I'll be in a group of people and like I'll make a joke, like an inside joke, and then somebody will like finish the joke, and I'm like, oh, okay, we get it. We are attached. We belong to each other because we both belong to this thing that's bigger than us. So that totally is a thing. But I wonder what separates that from something that is more theological sounding, like something that is more rooted in this concept of Christ. Because people can come together for all sorts of things. Does that mean God is at every gathering? Yes and no. It depends, right? Not looking for right answers here. Just trying to trigger some thoughts and see what comes up.
Yeah. um yeah, I think the interesting thing for me is just uh well, I can share an example from a friend, right? So one of the things that a really good friend of mine for over 30 years now, she lives in Taiwan right now, but we grew up together in the same church. She probably, of all the people in the world, she might be like the person who knows me the best, actually.
Dope.
That's a
Shout out
lot
to her.
because she's several years older, and she was actually, she wasn't that much like, she wasn't that much older when she was actually like teaching Sunday school for me. So I was
Mhm.
like, I think in elementary school, she must have been like in junior high or maybe early high school. So
Mhm.
she's definitely seen me grow up. But recently, and it's been wonderful when you have friends like over the decades who you don't grow apart, but you almost grow together. And
Mhm.
we've been through like, around the time that I started doing a lot of my own deconstruction, she was working through her stuff. So that was related to, because we're both Asian American, Taiwanese American, grew up in the same area, from California, have that Taiwanese lineage, have lived overseas, significant amount of time overseas, have both went to Fuller Seminary, not the same time, and also have worked through, has some pretty massive deconstruction. So her and her partner, her husband, they have 5 kids, but they had a big falling out with the church that they were pastoring.
Mm.
Basically, board just fired them. And and like she was already going through her own deconstruction, and but that really sped it up. And I don't think she's been to church now, I want to say in like 2 years, when that was her life,
Hmm.
and um still very much considers herself a Christian, but just kind of working through um like what uh um okay, remind me again what the original question was, because I'm getting to a point here. What was your original
um,
prompt?
I guess so. The original prompt was around this concept of belonging to people versus belonging to something bigger, and
Right.
then that kind of
Yeah.
went level two of belonging, in the sense of like, is God just with every group, or is there something
Yes,
different?
with every group. There you go. I'm getting to the point. Thank you for reminding me, because I'm like, okay,
You
now
got
I'm
it.
telling this whole story. Okay. So okay, so but recently, so she's been, because she's not been at church, and that used to be her primary community,
Yeah.
right? And where she thought like God should be showing up, but now she's got like, she's reaching out to people that she hasn't talked to in a long time. Her social circle is expanding to these different groups that aren't related to church anymore,
Hmm.
and she's finding, oh wow, like there's good stuff happening here, and she was surprised. And I think similarly with me, as I've been expanding, you know we were talking about earlier how much the evangelical church, yes, was a place of belonging, but also it kind of took over your life, right? Like, and then you don't realize there's actually a lot of good, and also that God does show up in other places. And so, um, you know, it's always surprising to me where God shows up.
Yeah.
Um, and that's as is how it should be, I think. I think God likes to surprise us. And um and that reminds me also, like, of, was it a month or so ago, or when one of Chris's sermons, we were doing that chair chat, and we were talking about beauty. Was it reclaiming beauty? And just kind of, one of the things that I think I had shared was just on my commute to work, and just like how beautiful it is, because I'm biking along the marina, and it's so easy to miss that. People come from all over the world to visit Fisherman's Wharf, or and it's just like in our backyard here, or like the Golden Gate Bridge, and if I don't intentionally take the time, I'm gonna miss that. But like, quoting like Jesus' first sermon is kind of, the kingdom of God is at hand, the kingdom of God is near. But do we have the eyes to see it? Do we?
Mm.
Because God is always, if God is present, he's announcing that the kingdom of God is actually here. And that's where, it's it's like the most um open secret in the world, that God is everywhere, and yet like no one sees.
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
Because we're so like, kind of caught up in our own thing, or the ways that we've grown up or been conditioned to think of, we need to look for God. And you can replace that with whatever it is, right? Look for love. Okay, love is only in romantic relationships. Or, oh, happiness is only found if I climb the corporate ladder, if I make more money. So there's just so
Yeah.
many ways we've been conditioned to look for the fulfillment of, who we were made to be, um, what will kind of, what's our purpose in life, when
Hmm.
it's already been given, it's already here. Yeah.
That's a bar. That's a bar. So many parables talk about comparing the kingdom to something that is hidden.
Right. Yeah.
And whether or not we can see it, it's less that it's hidden in a disclosed location that we have to go to, but it's more hidden just
In
around us
plain
because we don't
sight.
have the ability to
In plain.
interpret it, right?
Yeah.
Which is so good, and that's so true. And yes, God is bigger than any box that we can put God in. Um, which is really beautiful. So this takes me to my third degree of this question. First was like, is it, God or people, and now it's like, okay, it was God with the people, any people, all the people. It can be, can't be, depends on our ability to perceive God. But then the third one is now, with this concept of belonging, especially in protected spaces, one thing about the evangelical church that was communicated on Sunday is that yeah, it feels good because it caters to a certain way of living and it's counter to other ways of living. So there's this manufactured sense of safety that it's like, okay, you look like me, you think like me, you talk like me. Okay, we're safe, we're all together. So it's very exclusive that it doesn't allow other people in. But if this gospel is one that's preaching belonging to everyone, I was having a conversation with Jen. It was
Mm.
like 2 weeks ago. She was doing a song, and she wasn't comfortable with the lyrics because the lyrics were saying "come to the table," and it was listing different people, and it said rulers, kings, come to the table, and like we know that people in those positions of power typically have caused more hurt.
Mm.
And if we are a group of misfits that have been hurt by certain types of individuals, it it's challenging to say, hey, you're welcome and belong here too. Fill in the blank, right? With everything going on in the political sphere right now, it's probably easy to think of who we don't want to belong,
Right.
but they belong too. So how do we communicate belonging in a way that is truly inclusive and threatens our common sense of safety?
And this is really interesting because I'm just thinking like maybe there are times when belonging actually means excluding at the same time, right? Like, um, you know, for instance, I think about all the affinity groups, right? Like, and those groups, in order for it to feel like a safe space, you know, you have to identify, right? Like, so for instance, you have to identify as queer to be part of an LGBTQ group. I mean, there might be some that are open, I don't know, but like, there's just something about like the reason you get together, right? Like, or
Yeah.
even with with interest groups, right? Like, oh, okay, this is a hiking group, so it necessarily by defining something and necessarily defines what or like basically what isn't defined in that, right? So if this is a hiking group, if you're not going to go hiking, you're not in the hiking group.
Hmm.
Right? Like, so it just, and I think there is something about being able to define what you're belonging to versus like, oh yeah, we're just inclusive of everybody. Because I think that also loses something too. It's like,
Absolutely.
you know, it is difficult to um what am I trying to say? It is difficult though to stand up for something but still be loving. Is that
Hmm.
yeah, and also not necessarily do it out of place of anger or hurt because I
Mm.
think that oftentimes is what um just perpetuates the harm then like not saying that those spaces that are created out of hurt or anger or you know can't be healing spaces because oftentimes you do need a place to let out those feelings, but maybe it limits, right? Because again, it's creating a container, and I think we've talked about containers in the past couple of weeks too, is that maybe if that group doesn't grow out of and work through those um, initial feelings of anger and hurt, it will limit the size of the container. It will limit the growth and capacity of its members to go beyond that and to include, right? So um, I really appreciate Richard Rohr. I always quote him because his thing is include and transcend, include and
Hmm.
transcend. So then in every kind of when you think about if you want to think about them as levels of growth, then it's kind of like, well, it's not linear. Again, it's not linear, but it's kind of like, okay, I'm at this place in my journey. I'm working through these things. And I could be stuck there. when I'm able to include them and transcend them, then I can move on kind of because I've worked through those issues. Now I can move on to the next. But, you know, what I want is to continually grow my capacity to love, to forgive, to to continue to there's no like limit to it, you know. I think, yeah.
And I think that is having not grown up in evangelical spaces predominantly. I speak as an outsider. I'm not part of the in conversation with this, but I think that's kind of the flaw is that these white evangelical spaces created something that didn't necessarily evolve. It was like, hey, this is just how you do it, and it became crystallized. I
Right.
know that as a as a big fan of Bruce Lee. His big gripe with martial arts is very similar to this conversation we're having. He felt that people, their understanding of culture, the ability to move one's body, martial arts should always be evolving. And he didn't want to create his own martial art, Jeet Kune Do. And when he did create it, he kind of gave up on it because he knew that to create something is to create a set of rules and a set of understanding. And people, traditionalists, focusing on safety, focusing on right and wrong, as opposed to growth, art, and evolution, want to crystallize and make things static. And he's like, nah, man, it's the art of fighting without fighting because I'm not doing the stuff that y'all was doing. So he came to kind of create something that would always, be like water, adapt, always change, always grow, always evolve. And I think that's beautiful, but it's hard to do because I'll speak for myself so desperately. What is the system? What's the right or wrong? How do I do it correctly so I can be safe, right? And I think that's what it boils down to is this concept of safety. So going back to this idea of what about the other people that belong? And again, no right or wrong answer. There's kind of this like, well, there's times for this and there's times for that. There's times when Jesus hung out with the 12. There's times when he only hung out with the three. Peter, James, Paul. Uh, John, James. There was times when he only hung out by himself. Like there's times when you can include everyone, and there's times when you can only include a few, and there's times when you gotta be safe, and it's not about like following a formula as much as knowing that there has to be ebbs and flows, and that's hard. That's hard to do. Hmm. But those are my questions for you. I wanted to pick your brain on that. I think without the chair chat continued group on and additional engagement, I don't know if we'll keep this pushing much longer. Were there anything in your notes or anything um, regarding Bruce Lee that you wanted to talk about?
No, I appreciate that thought of just like, yes, in the initial stages of a movement or, you know, something that's exciting, it's like, yeah, it is like the spirit is moving, right? In at the start of something. And that can be a little chaotic. And you're just kind of you're just responding because things are like happening so quickly. And then, you know, as you get more people involved, as um you know, more people want to join and figure out like, oh, I want to be a part of this too, then you start putting together, right? You start to institutionalize it. You start to be like,
Mhm.
okay, well, first you do this, then you do this, and you're learning from the previous experience like how it happened,
Mhm.
right? And you're trying to document that. It's almost like I can think about work, right? Like, you know, then you start putting together a process flow, right? Like and then like some, you know, standards, right, for people to follow because they want to understand how do you replicate it, you know, how do you replicate that. In the case of Bruce Lee, then it's like a workout plan or the martial, right? Like you got,
Yeah.
what are the forms that you got to practice, because then you got to practice
Yeah.
every day so that you can, you know, whatever, level up, right? And then level
Yeah.
up with
Yeah.
the belts or level up, right? Or so, and then, you know, that becomes institutionalized, but then the context changes and people change. And then, you have to continually update and
Hmm.
revise
Hmm.
what once worked in the past, or the way that someone got to something doesn't mean that it will always turn out that way.
Right.
But we want it to, right? That's why like praying the magical prayer, and that will get you into
Hmm.
heaven. It was so,
Hmm.
do the
Hmm.
four spiritual laws. That was the
Hmm.
evangelism tool that we had used, like
Yeah.
the little booklet about, like, praying, and then this person's saved from hell. And I don't think it's like that.
That's true. No, that's so true. And I think that we try to make things basic, but just to be again, the popular term is devil's advocate. I don't like giving nobody no credit, so I'm saying thoughtful advocate here. There's this concept of traditional simplicity that does transcend time. Like, I don't know, the push-up will forever be like a top tier workout. And it's so simple, so basic. I don't know, eating whole foods. Like, that will do wonders for a person's health. And I'm not even talking aesthetics, like looks, just like general gut health and how serotonin is developed predominantly from a healthy gut. So depression is linked to a poor eating diet, which has nothing to do with the aesthetic, but it's general health and brain cognitive function on like sleep, eat
Hmm.
right, get movement, right? Like these basic principles that we struggle to do because of the busyness and chaoticness of our life. But it's like, no, if we just went back to these simple basics. So there is something tangible in the success of tradition, but it's like, is it God's tradition or is it man's tradition, right? I think that can be where it's like, well, what's God's tradition? What's man's tradition? It's it's a hit and miss. I do have a question here. I want to hear if you have any thoughts, but if you do, hold them, catch them. Um, Michael, welcome. You say you went to church camp and remember cry nights. You do remember the cry nights. You would apologize, but had no idea what she was apologizing for. And it was hella manipulative. I'm so sorry, Michael. That sucks. Jeez Louise. Uh, Funny enough, I actually that brought up a similar story. I remember one time I said I don't really get the praying in tongues. And this dude, I'm sensitive about my body. I don't like people touching me. And this dude put his hand on my belly and he just started praying. And I fake spoke in tongues so he would get his hand off me. Yeah, very weird times. Uh,
Oh man,
very
the
weird
cry.
times.
Yeah, yeah, Michael, I'm sorry.
Yeah,
Those memories,
jeez.
those memories. Yes, there's something about, though, going back to what you were talking about, Greg, though, tradition. And I've heard of it called the perennial tradition in terms of faith
Mhm.
practices. And that could be across multiple faiths. And, and especially when you start getting into like interfaith dialogue and stuff, and you start going back and seeing how many similarities there are across the different faith traditions, um, and what has endured over time, right? But so it's almost like, what is it? The content, maybe a lot of the, like, the form versus the content. Um, yeah, and us making things, sometimes a lot of times more complicated than they need to be. Yeah.
Mhm. Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, any additional closing thoughts you got, Rachel? No,
It's
I
good.
think
Thanks for joining,
there's
Michael. Yeah.
yeah, there's two more lovely but quiet viewers. So shout out to you two for checking it out. And anybody who's watching at a later time. If you have any additional comments, questions, anything along those lines, feel encouraged to drop them in the comment section so we can respond. We want to make this as much of a live, engaging conversation as possible. But with that, this is fun. No answers, just dialogue. We'll say that you belong with this community at Oak Life. If you're watching, you're. We'll try to make it as safe as possible. And with that, peace out. Take care. See you next week for the last Roots and Branches. We'll have Reverend Brianna Shaw Robinson speaking this coming Sunday. Topic will be a surprise. You better tune in, and we'll catch you next time. Peace.
Talk to him. I ain't got a hoop. I ain't got a hoop.